Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Glad you're here. My name is Josh. As you can tell, our pastor Cecil is back today. He looks rested, relaxed, and tan, and we love that. I think it looks great. In fact, in the Joy Box on your way out, we'd love for you to put a prayer request, but also caption which Backstreet Boy he looks like. We'll have a contest and maybe do a raffle. And so we've been in a series called Stand, and this has been a great series for me, and it's really looking to see how in the book of Daniel, Daniel has followed a life of faith and what that really means for him. And we're going to be in the last part of this series today. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. How many of you guys have just had a day where it just goes off the rails? Just everything seems to go a little bit wrong. For me, that was Friday. So Friday, I show up at work. I have no meetings. So I was like, this is going to be the best day ever. I'm going to get caught up, open my laptop, and I'm a consultant. And the first email I see is from my largest client. And they've emailed my entire executive team, and they said, hey, we don't feel like we're getting enough resources. We need you to really give us more attention. I took it kind of personal. I spent a lot of time with them, and I call them almost twice a day. We talk about their kids, and so I really felt kind of attacked. And so we spent most of Friday building timelines and emails, and how do we respond to this? And at the end of the day, we had a meeting with their team and our team, and it was a great meeting. It all worked out, but as I was driving home, I was still kind of pent up. And so my wife said, hey, listen, I know it was a rough day. Why don't you go to your favorite coffee shop, finish working on the sermon, just kind of relax. So I was like, great, this is awesome. So I get to the coffee shop, I sit down, I order my favorite little espresso shot with this honey foam. Don't judge me, it's amazing. And I'm still feeling a little bit stressed out. And so I put my headphones in, and I'm like, there's no way I can focus. I got to figure out why I'm feeling this way. And the first thought that hit me, I hated, and it was, I want to be liked. And so if you ask me that on those personality surveys, I'll say, no, that's not important to me. I'm my own person. I want to be a leader. I want to be hard charging. I don't care about opinions. But I realized sitting there, I really do. And so I began to kind of flood back memories of my life where I had made some pretty poor decisions because I wanted to be liked, because I wanted to fit in, because I wanted to be part of a group. And I think if we were all honest, I'm sure we could spend the next hour sharing those stories. And so we're going to do that. We're going to start in the back and go one by one. But no, I sat there and I realized, okay, I can pinpoint really tough memories where I made decisions that I probably shouldn't have because I wanted to fit in. But what we're going to see today, we're going to see three teenagers who stand up to one of the most powerful kings in all history. We see them stand firm in their faith, and God delivers them in an amazing way. So I want to kind of set the stage, and I'm going to preface ahead of time. Old Testament passages are tough because they're long. So we're going to read a lot of verses today. So kind of buckle up, but it's a good thing because God's word is more important than what I'm saying. So let's just kind of know this is going to happen. So I want to recap kind of where we get to Daniel chapter 3, because it's important to understand who the characters are. So King Nebuchadnezzar is king of Babylon. He's powerful, probably one of the most powerful kings in all of history. And he has a dream. And he says, listen, I've got to figure this dream out. It was disturbing. So he gathers all of the magicians and the mages and the wise men. And he says, here's the deal. I'm not going to tell you my dream. You're going to tell me what I dreamed, and then you're going to interpret it. And so they're like, well, no one can do that. Like, just tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it is. And he goes, nope, I'm not going to do that. And so all the wise men finally say, listen, no one in the land can do this. And so the king says, all right, well, I'll just have you all killed. And so there's a decree that goes out, and he says, fine, just go ahead and kill all the wise men. They can't do it. And so Daniel has a vision of what the king saw. He gets an appointment and goes, okay, listen, I'm going to tell you your dream, and then I'll interpret it. And so we see this dream where Nebuchadnezzar sees a giant statue. It has a head of gold, which represents his kingdom. And so Daniel says, listen, your kingdom is powerful. It's the head. It's made of gold. But there are other pieces. The body is made of silver, the legs of bronze and iron and clay. And he says, this kingdom won't last forever. And then in this vision, a giant stone comes and it starts crushing pieces of the statue. And the statue kind of blows up and the stone settles and turns into a mountain. Daniel says, listen, no kingdom will reign forever except one in eternity. So this is kind of where we pick up in Daniel chapter 3. And verse 1 says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. So to give you perspective, so he has this vision, king has this vision, and his response to vision is go build a 9-story tall statue. Okay, this is a big statue, okay, made of solid gold of his image. So he's made it, and he says he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials. So it's a real who's who of the kingdom. It's come to dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered, and they had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship this golden image that's been set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Okay, so the stakes are pretty high here. He's saying, I'm going to play some music. You guys are going to bow and worship, or I'm going to put you in that fiery furnace. And of course, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 8 says, "Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship that image shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. But there are certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image.'" First thing I thought was, haters are going to hate, right? They kind of point out that these three teenagers did not bow. So let's kind of recap what's happened. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He builds this gigantic statue. They have kind of a worship night. They get the band out there. I still picture kind of the deep V and cool haircuts and skinny jeans. I think that's for all time. And the crowd, when they hear the music, all bow down, right? And I'm sure in this crowd, there are some people in this crowd that legitimately think that Nebuchadnezzar is God. They think that he's doing great things. They think he's powerful. So they're bowing because they believe. My guess is there's probably quite a few people that are bowing because they don't want to go into a furnace, right? Or they're in positions of influence where if they don't bow down, the people around them are going to ostracize them. So everybody bows. And I was kind of thinking about this, and I think sometimes in the Old Testament, it's hard to put it in modern terms, right? We think, all right, there's not really kings like this where we are. There's no big statues we're bowing down to. And I realize for us, just kind of contextualize it, I think entertainment and comfort could be our idol, our statue that we bow down to, right? There are a lot of things, and I have a lot of conversations, and I've been guilty as well, where there are television shows, there are movies, there are things that we watch and consume that are not God-honoring, but we do it because everyone else is, right? At the office, someone's like, "Oh, have you seen the series?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it was pretty awesome." And then my believer friend goes, "Man, you watched that?" And I'm like, "Well, I turn my eyes when things happen." And, we kind of make these excuses, but I think it's what we see, right? Sometimes we do things because we want to fit in. And so what we see is we see everyone bowing, and then a group of kind of jealous leaders go to the king, and they push his ego, and they go, "Hey, you remember when you said when the music plays, if they don't bow, we're going to toss them in the fiery furnace?" Well, I actually saw 3 people in the back who didn't bow. So if your word is true, then what are we going to do about this, right? And that's where we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And just to kind of give a quick recap of them. So they were with Daniel when they were brought over when Babylon went in and destroyed Jerusalem. They were some of the wealthy nobles and royals were brought over to kind of get an MBA in Babylonian culture. And so even at a young age, they've assumed positions of power and influence. And so people are jealous, right? Like you don't have to know the Bible to know that if you're in a place of power or position, there's going to be jealous people who want that. And so that's kind of what we see here. So let's kind of see what happens. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these names are difficult. If you're looking for boy names, these are probably still open, so just keep that in mind, that they be brought up. And so they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, fall down, worship the image that I've made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? And then the way they respond is amazing. So the king has brought them up, and they respond this way. And it says in verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. We have no need to even talk about this. If this be so, our God who we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. So our first truth today is this, is that faith obeys God, not man. Faith obeys God and not man. And we see this, right? The king calls him back up. He says, go fetch him, right? They didn't bow. Go bring him up here and I'll talk to him. Maybe they didn't hear the announcement. And so he says, listen, guys, you know what I said. I'm going to have the band play the chorus again. And if you guys bow, all's good. Maybe you just didn't hear it. But if not, that furnace over there, which you can actually see from where you're standing, that's going to be your new home, right? And what do they say to him? They say, we have no need to answer you. Whew. I wouldn't talk to my grandma like that, much less a king who, when people didn't know his dreams, said, let's just kill everybody, right? This is not someone that usually just talk back to. And I think it's funny because when we read Bible passages like this, I think we put ourselves in that situation and we see how we would respond. And we go, oh, we respond that way. And this might be a guy thing. If my wife's in here, she's going to cringe because she hates when I do this. But I always visualize how certain circumstances would play out. So let me give you an example. So I was at the movies probably a couple months ago. Now that we have a baby, with a couple buddies at Alamo Draft House, and the guy behind us kept answering his phone, like legit, hey, how's it going? I'm at a movie. So my buddy turned and said, hey, do you mind taking it outside? Non-confrontational. The guy exchanged a few words, and then he kind of walked out. And that was really it. But in my mind, like a full fight scene like ensued, right? He had 4 friends, and so I was picturing like throwing popcorn and then like fashioning the bag into a sword or something. And I play all this out in my head of what would happen, right? I think this might be a guy thing, because my wife's always like, what are you talking about? So we picture that if we were there, that yeah, we would go up to the king and we would say, we're not going to talk about this and we're not going to bow. And then we'd run and jump off the stage and slide down a big curtain and land on a horse and ride away, right? That's not how I think we would really respond. And I pictured how I think, unfortunately, probably a lot of us, and myself included, would respond as we would probably hear the music, it would start playing, and we'd start kind of looking around first. All right, that family, go to church with them, they're starting to bow. Okay, yep, Steve's bowing. Okay, Gary's starting to bow. And okay, nope. If I don't touch both knees, is it really bowing? Is it crouching? Okay, no. If I'm not bowing in my heart, is it really bowing? If my body's bowing, but in my heart is still God? Or even worse, we make logical excuses like, hey, listen, if I don't bow, I'm going to be killed, and then how can God use me to bring my neighbors to Jesus? And then what will God do here in Babylon because I'm not here? And so we start to make these excuses of why our knees touch the ground, right? I think for a lot of us, we would look down and go, oh no, we're bowing, right? And so we have to read this and understand the tremendous power that these teenagers had. And I think what also stuck out to me is that in their faith, it wasn't noisy, it wasn't showy, right? The music played, they just stood there. They didn't create a Facebook group or a petition to say, if we get 1,000 signatures, we won't be tossed into the furnace. They stood there. And I also love that they didn't start pointing at other people who may not have bowed, right? I think as a church, sometimes we want to call out all the non-bowers, right? And so they're just standing there and they're just saying, I'm focused on God and me. We, the 3 of us, are not going to bow. They're not worried about anybody else. And so their faith was one where they were on a path to obey God. They didn't have to pray about it. They didn't have to fast about it. They didn't have to call a friend. They didn't text somebody, right? They knew that God said, do not worship other gods. Plain and simple, we're not going to bow, right? Faith obeys God, not man. And there's very real consequences for them. Let's look at verse 19. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it is usually heated. So Nebuchadnezzar's not one that likes people coming back on him, and so he says, crank it up, right? I can imagine this big furnace where people are just starting to toss wood into, and so you're these teenagers, you're standing here in front of the king, and you start to see this fire just blaze. So the second truth is this: faith believes in spite of what it sees. Faith believes in spite of what it sees. So if you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you see a nation bowing before a king. I picture they're still on their knees bowing as the music plays. You see a king in front of you where it says his expression was changed. It was one of fury. You see a fire raging. So every part of you is going, oh, this isn't good. I don't think this is going to be a good outcome. But faith believes in spite of what it sees. And this became very real for me. I was sharing with a few folks before service. Sometimes when you are preparing a message, I think God kind of illuminates application in your life of what you're seeing. And so Friday, that same coffee shop, I just kind of got settled down. And my mom calls. And she says, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm at coffee shop doing my sermon. And I'm relaxing. And she goes, hey, I just want to catch you up on a few things. Your grandfather's had a really hard week, and we took him to the ER. We're here at the hospital. He's going to be here for a few days, and he's got a mass on his liver, and it may be cancer, and his heart's got issues. And so I just come stop by after you get done because I want you to just kind of see him. And I'm like, oh, man, right? I'm sure everyone here's kind of experienced that phone call. And I look down, and I've literally just typed on my screen, faith believes in spite of what it sees. So I'm going, all right, how do I respond to this? I got one option: faith believes in spite of what it sees. And so I pack my stuff up and I go to the hospital. And my grandfather was a football coach, so he's big, strong, loud. He's very loud. That's where I get it from. And I walk in, and you know the scene. There's tubes tied to him and all kinds of stuff, and monitors and machines. And I walk over to the bed, and I'm kind of saying hi, and he's so quiet I can't even hear him. He's trying to talk, but he didn't have the strength to talk to me. And in that moment, I'm sitting there going, this looks bad, right? This doesn't look good. And I have to remind myself that faith believes in spite of what it sees. And that's hard, right? And I think everyone in here can probably think of a situation, right? There are times where you've opened your bank account and you see more days than dollars. And you go, I don't know how we're going to do this, right? We have 2 mortgages. We have a car payment. We've got kids in college. I don't know how we're going to make this happen. I don't know where it's going to come from. Right? There's relationships where you have a husband and wife that no matter what's going on, you guys are just struggling to be in the same room with each other at certain times. And you're going, I don't know what happened. This looks bad. Right? I've had friends and family who have dealt with addiction and seeing just the way that their life kind of spirals. And you go, I don't know where this goes. This just looks bad. Right? But faith believes in spite of what it sees. And I think if we're honest, here's the hard part. Here's the part that I think that voice in the back of our head does. It says, what if God doesn't show up? What if God doesn't come through? Right? I can stand up here and I can say that faith believes, but there's a part of me that always goes, but what if he doesn't? Right? And as I'm sitting in that hospital, I'm on one of those little uncomfortable fold-out beds, and my grandfather's sleeping, my mom's on the phone, and I'm just doing what I know how to do, which is pray. And I'm praying, God, just settle in this room, heal him, do something here. And there's part of me going, what if the minute I leave, something happens, right? What if I'm doing all this prayer and I'm telling my family I'm praying and then he doesn't get better, right? And there's same with the finances. What happens if I say that I believe in God's provision and then all of a sudden the end of the month comes, I don't have that job yet, I don't have that money yet, the bank account hasn't grown. What do we do in those situations, right? It's easy to stand and say faith believes, but there are times when you really have to live that. And I'll never forget the first lesson I had. I did some youth ministry in Austin a long time ago, and one of our senior girls was a pastor's daughter, and she would pray every single week for one of her friends by name that they would come to church. And this girl was great, but going through hard times, and so she would pray, and I mean every single week. And after a year, I'm going, all right, she hasn't shown up. Like, we discussed this last week, like, all right, maybe it's time to move on. Like, let's change the prayer up. Let's say it differently. Pick a different friend, right? It doesn't look like she's going to come. And I'll never forget the Wednesday that we were playing a game, and I looked up and I saw that girl walk in our building. And I think I actually screamed like a girl and ran up, and I was like, "Oh my God, how's it going? Nice to meet you." And I'm sure she was like, "This guy is a freak." But I had literally prayed for her every single week for over a year. And it was amazing to see as that year progressed. We saw her baptized. I still stay in contact with her now, and it's amazing what God's doing. But God is doing things sometimes that are hard for us to understand. And so for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they're standing up there, right, things look bad. But they're not going to question if God's coming through, because our third truth is this, is that faith is our job. The outcome is God's. Faith is our job. Outcome is God's. And that's a lesson that they portray well. And back to verse 18, they've just told this king, listen, if this is going to happen, our God will deliver us. He's able and he will deliver us. It's a very strong message. And the passage could have ended right there. Right? Our God is able and is willing. But verse 18, they say, but if not, but if he doesn't, if we still end up in that furnace, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up. Right? So they're saying, listen, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I think that God's going to show up. I think that God is going to deliver us. But if he doesn't, know that he will still be good and he will still be glorified no matter the outcome. So we see them completely submit. And I thought about this all week. I thought about this, just what I'm seeing here. And where I landed was that their faith was not on their deliverance, but it was on God. I'm going to say that again. Their faith was not on their deliverance. It was on God. They're saying if we go in the fire, God is still good. God is still worthy of our faithfulness. Right? And I think if you talk to a lot of people who have come from a church background, who are no longer in church, if you really dig down for them, there is probably a time where they have wanted something, prayed something that went different than they thought. Right? I remember talking to a guy at work where he grew up in church, and then his wife got cancer, and he said, "You know what? I prayed the entire time she was sick that she'd be healed. You know, we fasted, we prayed, the elders prayed, but do you know what? She still died." And he goes, "I can't get behind a God that does that." And that story kind of stuck with me because I realized that it's easy for our faith to center on the healing, not the healer. Right? The deliverance from the trial, not the deliverer. It is a challenge sometimes to realize that God can still be good even though the situation turned out different. And they're saying, listen, if we go on this fire, it's not good for us. Right? They're not saying this is going to be a fun ride. What they are saying is that God will still be glorified. He will still have a witness here that we would not bow down regardless of the situation. I think it's so important because there are going to be people that we pray for that will not receive healing. And I wish I knew the answer to why that happens. But I know that God is still good. There are going to be people who want that certain job, that certain promotion, a certain situation, their marriage to come back together, and it may not happen, but God is still good. It's our job to believe, and it's his job for the outcome. Right, and we see this in Hebrews. They're very clear that all saints throughout history haven't had a great deliverance story like these three. This verse in Hebrews 11:35-36 says this: "Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned and they were sawn in two and they were killed with a sword." Right? This is one of those verses where you're like, that's depressing. I'm not going to memorize that one. But the truth is that there are people all throughout our church history that have stood up for their faith that weren't delivered like that. Right? And so faith is our job. The outcome is God's. Verse 19, again, it says that then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These 3 men fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. So he heated up so much that the guys that bound and took him up there also died. right? So this is a king that overreacts. And what's crazy is it says that he called some of his best men to go do this. So he was willing to sacrifice anything to accomplish this, right? So it says he bound them, and they fell into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste, and he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound in the fire?" And they answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the Son of God's." It says, then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace and declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." He says, "Come on out. I can see you're not harmed." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over their bodies of these men. The hair of the head was not singed, the cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire came upon them. This is amazing, right? They've been bound. They've been tossed into the fire. They're in the fire, and the king goes, "Wait a second. Didn't you guys throw in 3? I see 4. Right? And he runs up and he goes, "Come on out." Can you imagine the scene? You see this king talking to this burning fiery furnace that they've just seen people plunged into, and they come out, not a single singe on them. They're just kind of strolling out. Their clothes still look good. Their hair still looks good. That has to be an amazing scene. And it said that the fire had no power over their bodies and that there was no evidence of fire, no singe. God had delivered them. Our God is a delivering God. God was with them in the fire, and scholars will debate who that 4th person was. Was it Jesus? Was it an angel? And really, at this point, I think it's God did something amazing there. We can argue all day about it. God delivered them. And here's the thing we have to see from this, and I keep telling myself, is that God is bigger than our trial and our fire. Right? I think we all know that. That's something you hear in church often. I think what stuck out to me is that they walk out and they don't smell like fire. They don't look like a fire. They don't have burn marks. Your trials don't define who you are. Right? It's easy when we're going through things to go, okay, I'm the divorced person now. Okay, I'm the one who can't keep a job. Okay, I'm the one that's been struggling with addiction, and how do I get past this? And what God says is he delivered them, and that they didn't even look like the trial they'd just been through. God is a deliverer and a restorer, and he delivered them. And then I thought about this story, just how it played out. I thought, God could have intervened at any point in this story, right? If God's plan was to save and deliver them at any point, he could have stopped that. So he could have made it rain way early on and just quenched the fire of that furnace. That would have been cool. He could have sent in angels and picked up the boys and teleported them. And there's a lot of things that God could have done. But here's the thing: he delivered them in the flames, in that fire, right? So picture being Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You're bound up. You've just told the king that God's going to deliver you, and you're walking up those steps, right? You're getting closer and closer to that fire, and you're starting to feel the heat of it. If you ever had a bonfire before, you can start feeling the heat. It starts to get to you, and as you get closer, you realize that you're in the fire, right? And that God delivered them in the fire. And I think it's what's so good here is this, and verse 24 one more time. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast in 3 men bound in the fire?" They answered, and they said, "Yeah, but I see 4 walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of God's." Verse 25 says, and they were free, basically. They walked out, right? The fire set them free. They walked in bound, and they walked out without the binds. I don't know why that, for me, just really set in that God set them in the fire bound up, and that the only thing that burned up, the only thing that had any evidence that they had been in that fire was now that those ropes and binds were gone. And I thought about, probably for some of us, and myself included, there are things that damper our spiritual life. There are things that we hold on to. There are comforts. There are ideals. There are things, for me, sometimes it's job, sometimes it's wanting that next promotion, that next raise, that I think bind my faith in God, right? They tie me up because there's a constant battle of, do I do this thing or do I focus on this thing so I can get the job and provide for my family or whatever I tell myself I need to do? but God put them in that trial to set them free. Right? And so I think for a lot of us, we pray to be delivered from the trial. We say, God, don't make me go through this trial. Right? Show up on the steps. Show up before we're in that fire. Show up. Make the rain come. I don't want to feel the heat of that fire. Sometimes we have to be in that trial for God to really set us free. And that's a hard truth. Right? We see Jesus constantly tells this theme of really dying to ourselves. And there's a part of suffering that makes us new, that makes us understand the goodness of God. And I think for these three teenagers that have just stood up, that have just seen the fire, there's probably a real sense of freedom for them, that God has delivered them and set them free from what they just went through. And there's a verse that I think gets used a lot, and I think people don't use it correctly. It's one of those kind of make you feel good Christian verses, and it's Romans 8:28. And it says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And I think we tell ourselves verses like this, and we go, all things work for good, right? I don't have to get in the fire. This job is going to happen. This person's going to be healed because God works for all things good. But when we read that, the problem is that we think that the good is our good, right? We think, okay, that must mean that it's good to me. And if that was true, if we were the good in that verse, we would be God, and that would be scary, right? I would not make a good God. My wife will tell you that. So we read these and we get caught up and we say, how can it be good if we're praying for healing, they're not healed? How can it be good if we don't have that job? And this is where they say, look, we were delivered from the fire. An entire nation who just bowed before this statue saw God deliver us, free us, and we walked out of that fire. That is the good. Right? And even if we hadn't been delivered, even if we were still in that fire, those people would have seen that we loved God enough that we would go into a fire instead of just bowing for 5 seconds during a song. So when it says that God works out together for all good, it's his glory. For those according to his purpose, it's when we're following his purpose that God will be glorified. So if we've learned anything in this series, if we've learned kind of a theme, it's this, and I put it up here. It's this, that faith means trusting God and his word. Faith does not mean we know or understand his purpose. I don't always know if folks don't get healed. I don't know why some prayers aren't answered. I don't know why there are natural disasters. I wish I did. But I know that faith is a readiness to follow him, whatever the purpose or outcome. Right? And so every series we've been in the past couple weeks, we've seen that, right? Daniel is willing to stand up to a king. Daniel's praying in a lion's den. Daniel's willing to live a life of faithfulness because he understands that following God is the best thing that he can do. And he doesn't always understand it. We don't have to, but there is a faith that comes in spite of what it sees when we obey God and not man.